The silence was deafening. 23 pairs of eyes stared at me across my grandmother's mahogany dining table. 23 family members who had just watched my Aunt Patricia strip away every shred of dignity I thought I had left. The crystal chandelier above us cast shadows that seemed to dance mockingly across their faces, and I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears like helicopter rotors. But what they didn't know, what she didn't know, was that in exactly 47 minutes, Admiral Rebecca Hayes would walk through that front door, and everything my aunt had just said about me being a disappointment, a waste of potential, and a burden to this family was about to crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of the night my family discovered who I really was. 6 months earlier, everything had been different. I was Captain Sarah Mitchell of the U.S. Air Force, stationed at Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and amber as I performed my final equipment check. The weight of my flight suit, the familiar hum of the aircraft engines, the crisp mountain air, it all felt like home. "Captain Mitchell," my wingman Jake called out, his voice crackling through the radio. "You ready for this milk run?" I smiled inside my helmet. "Born ready, Thompson. Let's bring our boys home." We were flying a routine medevac mission. Simple extraction, they said. Pick up 3 wounded soldiers from a forward operating base and transport them to the field hospital. Just another Tuesday in a war zone. But war doesn't care about routine. 15 minutes into the flight, everything went wrong. The radio exploded with panicked voices, coordinates changed, and suddenly we weren't heading to a secure landing zone anymore. We were diving straight into hell. "Multiple casualties on the ground." The voice was desperate, breathless. "We've got an entire squad pinned down by enemy fire. They need immediate extraction." Through my headset, I could hear the distant sound of gunfire, explosions, real people dying in real time. Jake's voice cut through the chaos. "Sarah, that LZ is too hot. Command says to abort and return to base." I stared down at the landscape below. A maze of rocky outcroppings and scattered buildings where American soldiers were fighting for their lives. My hands gripped the controls tighter. "Negative," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "We're not leaving them." "Captain, that's a direct order. Then court-martial me later." I banked hard left and descended toward the combat zone. The ground rushed up to meet us, and I could see muzzle flashes sparkling like deadly stars in the shadows between buildings. My aircraft shuddered as bullets pinged off the hull. Landing in a hot zone isn't flying. It's controlled falling with style. Every instinct screamed at me to pull up, to get out of there, to save myself. But through the smoke and chaos, I could see them. 12 soldiers huddled behind whatever cover they could find, their faces painted with dust and desperation. Among them was a young medic, couldn't have been more than 19, trying to treat a wounded sergeant while bullets whined overhead. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work, but he never stopped trying. That's when I saw him. Admiral Hayes, though I didn't know his rank then, was just Lieutenant Commander Hayes, leading a joint operation that had gone sideways. He was crouched behind a concrete barrier, directing his men's defensive positions while blood seeped through a makeshift bandage on his shoulder. Our eyes met across that hellish landscape, and I saw something in his expression that I'll never forget. Not fear, though any sane person would have been terrified. What I saw was hope. Hope that someone crazy enough had come to get them out of there. The extraction took 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. 8 minutes of enemy fire, mechanical failures, and prayers to a god I wasn't sure was listening. Jake provided air cover while I loaded the wounded, their blood staining my flight deck, their quiet, "thank you" whispers breaking my heart. The last person I loaded was Hayes himself. As he climbed aboard, our eyes met again, and he mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. The flight back was a nightmare painted in adrenaline and relief. One of the wounded, a kid from Ohio with kind eyes and a shattered leg, grabbed my hand as I knelt beside his stretcher. "You saved us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "When everyone else said it was impossible, you came anyway." I squeezed his hand. "That's what we do, soldier. We don't leave people behind. But the cost of that decision was higher than I could have imagined. 2 days later, I was called into Colonel Martinez's office. The walls were covered with commendations, unit photos, and the kind of military memorabilia that speaks of a long, distinguished career. But his expression was granite hard as I stood at attention. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying the weight of disappointed authority. "Your actions during the extraction mission have been reviewed by the board." My stomach dropped. "Sir, you disobeyed a direct order to abort the mission. You endangered valuable aircraft and personnel. And while your initiative resulted in the successful extraction of 12 personnel, the military cannot condone such reckless disregard for protocol." The words hit me like physical blows. "Sir, those soldiers would have died." "That's not your decision to make, Captain." He slid a folder across his desk. "You're being discharged. Honorably, given the circumstances, but discharged nonetheless. Effective immediately." I stared at the papers, the official seals, the bureaucratic language that was ending my career. Everything I had worked for, everything I had dreamed of since I was a little girl watching fighter jets at air shows. Gone. "Sir, if I could just explain—" "There's nothing to explain, Mitchell. You're a fine pilot, but the military requires discipline above all else. I'm sorry." And just like that, Captain Sarah Mitchell ceased to exist. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I moved back to my hometown in Ohio, a small place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and gossip traveled faster than sound. My parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving me with only my extended family, and they made their disappointment crystal clear from day one. Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, was the unofficial matriarch of the Mitchell clan. She owned half the businesses in town, sat on every important committee, and had opinions about everything, especially about me. "It's such a shame," she would tell anyone who would listen, her voice dripping with false concern. "Sarah had such potential. We were so proud when she joined the Air Force. But you know what they say about people who can't follow orders. I found work at the local airport, maintaining small aircraft for crop dusters and weekend pilots. The pay was terrible, the work was routine, and every day felt like a reminder of everything I had lost. But at least I was still around planes, still connected to the sky that had once been my domain. My colleagues were kind enough, but I could see the pity in their eyes. Here was Sarah Mitchell, the hometown girl who had flown military jets, now reduced to changing oil in Cessnas. The fall from grace was complete. At family gatherings, the whispers followed me like shadows. Cousins would ask pointed questions about my early retirement from the military. Uncles would make jokes about desk jobs being more my speed now. And through it all, Aunt Patricia would smile that thin-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. But the worst part wasn't their judgment. It was my own doubt. In the quiet moments, usually late at night when sleep wouldn't come, I would replay that mission over and over. Had I made the right choice? Was saving 12 lives worth destroying my own career? Would those soldiers have been rescued by someone else if I had followed orders? The questions ate at me like acid. 6 months after my discharge, Grandmother Mitchell turned 85. She was the only person in the family who had never made me feel small about my situation. During our weekly phone calls, she would listen to my struggles without judgment, offering quiet encouragement when the world felt overwhelming. "Sarah," she had said during our last conversation, "sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are on opposite sides of a very wide river. The measure of a person isn't whether they fall into that river, it's whether they're still willing to swim." Her birthday dinner was to be the social event of the season in our small town. Aunt Patricia had been planning it for months, turning what should have been a family celebration into a showcase for her social connections. The guest list read like a who's who of local society: the mayor, the school superintendent, prominent business owners, and various other pillars of the community. And me, the family disappointment. I almost didn't go. Standing in my small apartment, staring at the dress hanging in my closet, the same dress I had worn to military ceremonies, I felt the familiar weight of shame pressing down on my shoulders. But Grandmother had specifically requested my presence, and I couldn't disappoint her. The evening started normally enough. Grandmother's house was transformed into something from a magazine, with elegant flower arrangements, soft classical music, and enough food to feed a small army. Guests mingled in the living room, their conversations a pleasant hum of local politics and social updates. I tried to stay invisible, helping in the kitchen and avoiding the judgmental stares that seemed to follow me wherever I went. But you can't hide from family forever. The moment of truth came during dessert. We were all seated around grandmother's massive dining room table, a piece of furniture that had hosted 5 generations of Mitchell family celebrations. The conversation had been pleasant enough. Talk of local events, shared memories, gentle teasing between relatives. Then Aunt Patricia stood up. "Before we have cake," she announced, tapping her wine glass with a silver spoon, "I'd like to say a few words about family expectations and responsibility." My stomach clenched. I knew that tone. "We're gathered here tonight to celebrate a woman who has exemplified grace, dignity, and proper values throughout her long life." Aunt Patricia's gaze swept across the table, lingering meaningfully on various family members. "Grandmother Mitchell has always taught us that actions have consequences, and that how we conduct ourselves reflects on the entire family name." The room grew quieter. Several cousins shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Which is why," Aunt Patricia continued, her voice gaining strength, "I think it's important to address the elephant in the room." Her eyes locked onto mine with laser precision. "Sarah, I know this is difficult, but I think it's time we discussed your situation openly. For too long, we've all politely ignored the fact that you were discharged from the military for insubordination. We've pretended that your current employment, fixing small planes, is somehow equivalent to the career you threw away." The words landed like physical slaps. Around the table, family members stared into their dessert plates, unwilling to meet my eyes. The silence was suffocating. "I'm not trying to be cruel," Aunt Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But this family has a reputation to maintain. We can't keep making excuses for someone who clearly has problems with authority and responsibility." My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to anchor myself as the room spun around me. "Perhaps," she continued, warming to her theme, "it would be better for everyone if you considered moving somewhere else. Somewhere you could start fresh without complications." The room was silent except for the ticking of grandmother's antique clock. 23 pairs of eyes focused on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public execution. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself, to explain. But what was there to say? How could I tell them about the soldiers I had saved without sounding like I was making excuses? How could I explain that some rules are worth breaking without admitting that I was, in fact, insubordinate? Instead, I just sat there, drowning in shame while my entire family watched. That's when the doorbell rang. Grandmother looked confused. "I'm not expecting anyone else." Aunt Patricia frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption of her moment of triumph. "I'll see who it is." She walked toward the front door, her heels clicking authoritatively on the hardwood floor. The rest of us sat in uncomfortable silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I could hear muffled voices from the foyer, Aunt Patricia's sharp tone and a deeper voice I couldn't identify. Then Aunt Patricia returned, her expression puzzled and slightly irritated. "There's a gentleman here who says he needs to speak with Sarah. Something about the military." My heart stopped. Military? Had something gone wrong with my discharge paperwork? Was there some additional punishment I was facing? "He says it's urgent," Aunt Patricia added, her tone suggesting that whatever this was about, it couldn't possibly be good news. I stood on unsteady legs, aware that every eye in the room was following my movement. As I walked toward the foyer, I could hear the whispered speculations beginning behind me. "What do you think it's about? Maybe she's in more trouble. Poor grandmother having to deal with this embarrassment." But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw when I rounded the corner. Standing in grandmother's foyer, wearing a crisp dress uniform decorated with more ribbons and medals than I could count, was Admiral Rebecca Hayes. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her posture ramrod straight, and her eyes, the same eyes that had met mine across that hellish battlefield 6 months ago, were warm with recognition. Captain Mitchell, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from commanding aircraft carriers and making decisions that affect thousands of lives. Or should I say, former Captain Mitchell? I could barely find my voice. Admiral Hayes? Sir, ma'am, I struggled to remember proper protocol while my brain tried to process what was happening. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. At ease, Mitchell. I'm not here in any official capacity. I'm here because I owe you something. Ma'am? A debt that can never be fully repaid. From the dining room, I could hear chairs scraping and footsteps. My family was clustering in the doorway, trying to eavesdrop on this unexpected development. Admiral Hayes glanced toward the sound, then back at me. Is this a bad time? I can come back. No, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. No, it's my grandmother's birthday dinner. Family gathering. Ah, her expression grew thoughtful. In that case, would it be appropriate for me to pay my respects? I'd very much like to meet the woman who raised someone with your courage. Before I could respond, Aunt Patricia appeared at my shoulder, her social instincts overriding her confusion. Admiral, was it? Please, won't you join us for coffee? We were just finishing dinner. Admiral Hayes looked at me questioningly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. That would be wonderful, thank you. Walking back into that dining room felt like entering an alternate universe. My family, who moments before had been witnesses to my public humiliation, now sat in stunned silence as Admiral Rebecca Hayes, one of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. Navy, took a seat at our table. Aunt Patricia bustled around, suddenly the perfect hostess, pouring coffee and rearranging place settings. Admiral Hayes? Grandmother said warmly, apparently unfazed by having military royalty at her birthday dinner. What a pleasant surprise. How do you know our Sarah? The Admiral accepted her coffee with a gracious nod, then looked around the table at each face before her gaze settled on mine. Your granddaughter, she said, her voice carrying easily through the room, saved my life. You could have heard a pin drop. 6 months ago, I was leading a joint operation in Afghanistan. Things went wrong, they often do in war, and my team found ourselves trapped in a hostile environment with no way out. Command had written us off. They ordered all aircraft to avoid the area. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee while every person at that table hung on her words. But Captain Mitchell didn't follow that order. My aunt's fork clattered against her dessert plate. She flew straight into enemy fire. Admiral Hayes continued, her eyes never leaving mine. Landed in an active combat zone, and evacuated 12 personnel under the worst possible conditions. She risked her aircraft, her crew, and her career to save the lives of people she had never met. The silence was deafening, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This wasn't the hush of judgment. It was the stillness of awe. Among those 12 people was Lieutenant Commander Hayes, my son. I felt the blood drain from my face. Her son? The young medic with shaking hands, trying to treat wounded soldiers while bullets flew overhead. That had been Admiral Hayes's son? Tommy was 19 years old, she continued, her voice growing softer, more personal. He had enlisted as a Navy corpsman, determined to save lives. On that day, Sarah's courage didn't just save my son, it saved 11 other mothers' children as well. She reached into her uniform jacket and pulled out a small blue box. I've spent the last 6 months tracking down what happened to you after that mission. I learned about your discharge. I learned about the bureaucratic punishment you faced for doing what was right instead of what was ordered. And I came here tonight to present you with something that should have been given to you months ago. She stood, and the entire room followed suit instinctively, the kind of automatic respect that true leadership commands. Captain Sarah Mitchell, Admiral Hayes said, her voice now carrying the full weight of military protocol. By the authority vested in me by the United States Navy, and in recognition of extraordinary heroism under fire, I present you with the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroic conduct. The box opened to reveal a beautiful bronze star suspended from a ribbon of navy blue and gold. Furthermore, she continued, I am personally recommending you for immediate commission as a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy. Your country needs officers with your courage, your judgment, and your unwavering commitment to the warrior ethos that no one gets left behind. The metal felt heavy in my hands, not just with metal, but with meaning. Around the table, my family stared in stunned amazement. Aunt Patricia looked like she had swallowed her tongue. If you've ever sacrificed everything to do what's right and waited for this moment of recognition, make sure you're subscribed to see what happens when truth finally comes to light. But Admiral Hayes wasn't finished. I also want everyone in this room to understand something, she said, her voice growing stern, her gaze moving from face to face around the table. What Captain Mitchell did that day wasn't reckless. It was heroic. The decision to disobey orders wasn't made lightly. It was made by someone who understood that rules exist to serve principles, not the other way around. She turned back to me, her expression warming again. The 12 people you saved that day have gone on to live full lives. My son Tommy graduated from medical school last month and is now a Navy doctor. Sergeant Rodriguez, the wounded man from Ohio, just celebrated the birth of his third child. Corporal Jenkins got married last spring, and he specifically asked me to thank the Angel pilot, who gave him the chance to have a wedding day. Tears were running down my cheeks now, but I didn't care. These men are alive because you were brave enough to do what was right, even when it cost you everything. That's not a character flaw. That's the highest form of service our nation can ask of its warriors. She extended her hand to me, and I shook it firmly. Captain Mitchell, it would be my honor to serve alongside you again. What do you say? I looked around that table at faces I had known my entire life. My cousins stared at me with new eyes, seeing not the family disappointment, but someone who had been decorated for heroism. Uncle Robert nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. Even Aunt Patricia seemed to be struggling with a complete recalibration of everything she thought she knew about me. But it was grandmother's face that mattered most. Her weathered hands were pressed to her heart, and tears sparkled in her eyes as she smiled at me with pure, uncomplicated pride. I told you, she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are on opposite sides of a very wide river. I turned back to Admiral Hayes, this remarkable woman who had tracked me down just to set the record straight, who had traveled across the country to return my honor when my own family had tried to strip it away. Admiral, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. It would be my privilege to serve again. She smiled. Outstanding. Report to Naval Air Station Pensacola next month for orientation. You'll be assigned to the rescue squadron. I have a feeling you'll fit right in. As she prepared to leave, Admiral Hayes shook hands with each family member, thanking them for their hospitality. When she reached Aunt Patricia, she paused. You know, the Admiral said conversationally, in my 30 years of military service, I've learned that true strength often looks like weakness to people who don't understand the cost of courage. Your niece paid a heavy price for doing what was right. She deserves better than judgment. She deserves celebration. Aunt Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on pale embarrassment. After Admiral Hayes left, the dining room remained silent for several long minutes. Finally, Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Sarah, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. We all do. One by one, my family members began to speak. Cousins who had whispered behind my back now wanted to hear about my military service. Aunts and uncles who had made jokes about my early retirement now asked about the rescue mission. The narrative that had defined me for months, disgraced ex-soldier working at a small-town airport, crumbled completely. But the most important moment came when grandmother took my hands in hers as the evening wound down. I always knew, she said simply. I didn't know the details, but I knew my granddaughter wouldn't have been punished unless she had done something brave and right and difficult. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I've always been proud of you. 3 weeks later, I was cleaning out my small apartment, preparing for my move to Florida. The local newspaper had run a story about the hometown hero who was returning to military service. The airport where I worked had thrown a going-away party. Even Aunt Patricia had called to apologize, awkwardly, but sincerely. But the moment that meant the most came in the form of a letter forwarded to me through military channels. It was written in shaky handwriting on simple notebook paper. Dear Captain Mitchell, my name is Tommy Hayes. You probably don't remember me, but 6 months ago you saved my life in Afghanistan. Admiral Hayes is my mother, and she told me she found you. I wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about what you did for us. You didn't just give us our lives back. You gave us our futures. Because of your courage, I was able to finish medical school. I'm getting married next year to a wonderful woman named Jessica, and we're planning to have children. Every good thing that happens to me from now on exists, because you were brave enough to break the rules when it mattered. I hope someday I can be half as courageous as you were that day. With eternal gratitude, Latender Thomas Hayes, MD, USN. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my uniform pocket. In a few hours, I would be driving to Florida to begin the next chapter of my life. I would be serving again, flying again, doing what I was born to do. But more than that, I would be doing it with my head held high, my honor intact, and my family's respect restored. Sometimes the right thing and the easy thing are indeed on opposite sides of a very wide river. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to swim, you find that people are waiting on the other shore to pull you to safety. And sometimes, just sometimes, those people turn out to be admirals with medals and the power to change everything with two simple words: thank you. The silence at that dinner table had been deafening, but the applause that followed, the respect, the understanding, the restoration of my place in the world, that sound was worth every difficult stroke across that wide, dark river. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am a rescue pilot, a Navy officer, and a woman who learned that sometimes being right is more important than following orders. And I would make that same choice again in a heartbeat. If my story touched your heart, I need to ask you something. Almost no one subscribes to channels like this, but it's the only free way you can help me keep sharing stories of people who were underestimated, just like I was. When you hit that subscribe button, you're not just supporting me. You're standing with everyone who's ever been told they weren't good enough, who's ever been humiliated in silence, who's ever waited for their moment of truth. It cost you nothing, but it means everything to someone like me who almost gave up believing her story mattered. Please, don't scroll away. Subscribe now, because somewhere out there, another person needs to hear that their sacrifice, their courage, their truth, it all matters. Thank you.